George Harrison's greatest Beatles moment didn't come early. For much of the 1960s, his songwriting efforts were limited to 1 or 2 tracks per album, usually tucked away after a Lennon-McCartney barrage.
We had great fun, and then we had great pain and misery together, and we had a lot of problems. As everybody knows, we went up and down and round and round.
But with Something, released on Abbey Road in 1969, he delivered a composition that even his bandmates couldn't ignore. Frank Sinatra later called it the greatest love song of the past 50 years, although he misattributed it to Lennon and McCartney, a mistake that infuriated Harrison for decades. The track began as a melodic phrase he scribbled while working on other material. "I wrote it on the piano while we were making the White Album," he said later. "It was just something in my head." Some early drafts show him opening with the line, "Something in the way she moves attracts me like a pomegranate," which he soon abandoned.
What could it be, Paul? Something in the way she moves. What attracted me at all?
Just say whatever comes into your head each time. Attracts me like a cauliflower until you get the word.
The final lyrics were likely inspired by his then-wife Pattie Boyd, although George was always evasive about that. "Everybody assumed I wrote it about Pattie," he explained, "but I was thinking of Ray Charles."
Something in the way she moves.
With McCartney on bass and Lennon sitting this one out, Harrison took center stage. His slide guitar solo sang as clearly as the vocal melody, making it one of his most elegant musical statements. Producer George Martin contributed a string arrangement that gave the track a lush, romantic sheen without smothering its quiet charm. "I just thought it was the best song on the album," Lennon told Rolling Stone. "He's finally matched us." The reason the song made such an impression was because Harrison had spent years in the background, slowly developing his skills while Lennon and McCartney hogged the limelight. That created a hunger in him, and Something was the result of a long period of quiet frustration.
Over the years, I had such a lot of songs mounting up that I really wanted to do, but I only got my quota of 1 or 2 tunes per album. And that way I would have had to have recorded about 100 Beatle albums just to get out the tunes I had in 1965.
Were you held down by the other fellas?
Well, very subtly, yes.
Because Harrison had been sidelined for so long, his creative outburst in the late 60s was driven by an urge to prove himself. When the Beatles, better known as the White Album, sessions began in 1968, the mood in the band was sour.
Blackbird, fly into the line of a dark black.
The camaraderie of the early years had all but disappeared, and Harrison felt it most. "They weren't listening to me," he recalled, "and if they did, they would just dismiss it. It was very frustrating." While My Guitar Gently Weeps was Harrison's response to that indifference. He began the song as an experiment in Eastern philosophy, using the I Ching to guide his lyrics. "I decided to write a song based on the first thing I saw when I opened a book," he said. That first phrase, "gently weeps," became the emotional centerpiece. But the recording process proved just as strained. The band gave the song a half-hearted run-through before moving on. Disheartened, Harrison invited his friend Eric Clapton to play lead guitar. "They all perked up when Eric came in," Harrison later said. "Suddenly it was a session again." Clapton was hesitant to appear on a Beatles record, but Harrison insisted. "It's my song," he told him, "and I want you to play on it." The final track pulses with sadness. Clapton's solo bleeds through the verses, while Harrison's lyrics ache with disappointment. "I look at the world and I notice it's turning," he sings, "while my guitar gently weeps."
At the world, and I notice it's turning, while my guitar.
There's no hiding the bitterness beneath the melody. John and Paul were reportedly stunned when they heard the final mix. "That was George's masterpiece," Ringo Starr later said. "It was like, wow, he's arrived." The emotional power of the song lay in its sincerity. Harrison wasn't posturing, he was laying bare his disappointment with the band and the world around him. That raw honesty, coupled with Clapton's delicate playing, created a moment unlike any other in the Beatles' catalogue. Because Clapton's presence brought renewed energy to the session, Harrison began to see collaboration outside the Beatles as a path forward. One of the earliest results of that new openness was Badge, a track co-written with Clapton for Cream's final album, Goodbye, in 1969.
Told you not to wander around in the dark.
Though not widely known as a Harrison song, his fingerprints are all over it. He not only co-wrote it, credited under the pseudonym L'Angelo Misterioso due to Beatles' contractual obligations, but also played rhythm guitar on the recording. The story behind the title has taken on mythical status. Clapton had scrawled a chord change on the lyric sheet and labelled it Bridge. Harrison misread it as Badge, and the name stuck. George came up with the name, Clapton recalled. We were both drunk. Musically, the song veers from dreamy verses to a bright, almost Beatle-esque bridge. Harrison contributed the key lyric, thinking about the times you drove in my car, which added a whimsical intimacy.
I'm thinking about the times you drove in my car. Thinking that I might have drove you too far.
The result is a moody, reflective track that stands out in Cream's catalogue. More than just a one-off collaboration, Badge marked a turning point. It proved Harrison could write effectively outside the Beatles and be taken seriously as a peer by someone like Clapton. It also deepened their friendship, which would be both productive and tumultuous in the years to come. Because Harrison had proven his worth with Clapton, his confidence in his own songwriting began to grow rapidly. The Beatles' refusal to develop All Things Must Pass during the Let It Be sessions became a sore point for Harrison. He believed in the song's message and potential. It was a good song, he said, but they just weren't interested. He held onto it, eventually making it the centerpiece of his 1970 solo triple album of the same name.
All things must pass.
Inspired in part by the band's music from Big Pink, Harrison wanted to write something that felt organic and philosophical. It's just the truth, he said of the lyrics, all things must pass. The sentiment echoed the teachings of his spiritual mentor, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but also his own growing realization that the Beatles were finished. When recording began at Abbey Road, Harrison assembled a large team that included Clapton, Ringo Starr, Billy Preston, and members of Badfinger. He also brought in Phil Spector to help with production. The result was a song of grand proportions, both musically and thematically. Spector's wall of sound technique layered acoustic guitars, organ, slide guitar, and strings into something rich and expansive. But underneath the sonic scale was a delicate core. The song isn't mournful, it's accepting. Sunrise doesn't last all morning, Harrison sings, offering comfort rather than despair. It became not only a personal anthem, but a eulogy for the 1960s themselves.
Sunrise doesn't last all morning.
Because the song captured the mood of the post-Beatles world, Harrison's solo career took off with a clarity that had eluded him inside the group. In April 1969, George Harrison skipped a meeting at Apple Corps and drove out to Eric Clapton's house in the Surrey countryside. It was just a relief, he later said. The sun was out, and it felt like everything might be okay again. That afternoon, with an acoustic guitar in his lap, he wrote, "Here Comes the Sun." The song emerged not from joy, but from exhaustion.
Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. I say.
The legal and business headaches of being a Beatle were wearing Harrison down. But in Clapton's garden, he found a moment of calm. It was like the winter was over, he explained, metaphorically and physically. The track opens with a gentle acoustic riff that sounds like sunlight breaking through. Harrison plays in a mix of 4/4 and 7/8 time, but it never feels complex. Instead, it feels inevitable. That song just poured out of him, engineer Jeff Emmerich recalled. It was as though it had always existed. In the studio, Harrison took the lead. He used a Moog synthesizer to add subtle textures and layered vocal harmonies that shimmered. Lennon was recovering from a car crash during much of the Abbey Road sessions, so Harrison's role was unusually prominent. Despite never being released as a single, Here Comes the Sun became one of the most beloved Beatles tracks. In the streaming era, it's often the most played of all their songs. Its message, quiet resilience and the promise of better days, never seems to go out of date. Because Harrison channeled his weariness into something hopeful, Here Comes the Sun became his most universally loved composition. If you enjoyed this deep dive into George Harrison's finest songwriting moments, then you'll love our video about the day the Beatles broke George Martin's trust. Just click the thumbnail on screen now to keep watching.